Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. I make videos about Dungeons & Dragons lore full-time and have a huge collection of videos on monster ecology, fantasy world history, cosmology, character classes, and magic items on my channel. If you like what I do, please consider becoming a member of the channel by clicking the join button down below, or backing me on Patreon where you can get access to all of the scripts I write for these vids if you prefer to read what I'm saying. I also have a Discord server with a very active community, and of course, subscribe to me here, as I upload a video for you twice a week with a live stream every week as well. I've had a request to cover the humanoid species called the Mongrelfolk, and while they're not one that I've included in my games to date, after researching them and pondering their core concept over the various editions and the Ecology article written about them in Dragon Magazine number 242, I think I might actually put a few Mongrelfolk non-player characters into my campaigns in the future, mainly because they have so much potential as both tragic heroes and occasionally tragic villains. When you strip the species down to their very core, they are centered around the concept of gene splicing, by whatever means, and the lived consequences of it in actual living people in the game world. As role players, we tend to latch onto the idea of hybrid vigor and all the benefits that can come from mixed heritage. We look at half-elves, half-orcs, half-dragons, but we don't think about one-quarter hobgoblin, lizardfolk, kobold, sahuagin, do we? We don't even think about one-quarter human, halfling, genasi, and orc, let alone all the magical mayhem that can result from strange rituals, alchemical mishaps, and just the twists of fate, where so many different species occupy the same world for such a massive amount of time. Mongrelfolk are a logical inevitability. They make me really want to step into their shoes and understand their point of view within the role-playing game. They are a part of D&D history and published lore, which is what this channel is all about. So let's grab a beverage, settle back, we're about to get deeply nerdy. The complete book of humanoids, published by TSR for AD&D 2nd edition 1993, page 44, has this to say on the Mongrelfolk. Mongrelfolk combine the worst features of many species, including humans, orcs, gnolls, ogres, dwarves, hobgoblins, elves, bugbears, and bullywugs. No two Mongrelfolk look the same, but all appear as poorly constructed combinations of various humanoid races, always misshapen and ugly. Mongrelfolk grow to heights ranging from 5 to 7 feet tall. In general, they are ashamed of their appearance and do their best to keep their bodies hidden from those they encounter. So Mongrelfolk do understand the concept of beauty. They have the same concepts of beauty as other people, and they don't see themselves as pretty. Mongrelfolk speak common, though they intermix intelligible words with grunts, whistles, growls, and gestures. Their names often mimic animal noises. Mongrelfolk receive no welcome in lawful and good societies. Among evil and chaotic groups, they are met with enslavement and abuse. Most of these reactions are in response to Mongrelfolk appearances. They look like deformed monsters and are treated as such by society at large. They work as slaves or serfs, toiling endlessly for cruel and evil masters. But Mongrelfolk have infinite patience and an unswerving belief that their oppressors will eventually be punished by outside forces. Because of this belief, enslaved Mongrelfolk refuse to rebel against their masters even when the opportunity presents itself. Those remaining free often take up residence in abandoned ruins or other long-forgotten places. The Mongrelfolk are survivors. To remain alive and relatively unharmed is their ultimate goal. They do not seek power or treasure or fame like other races. An orderly day-to-day existence is a Mongrelfolk's perfect state of being. They believe patience is the greatest virtue, not the ability to destroy. They are by no means complete pacifists. They will only fight in self-defense or on the orders of their masters. Outside of captivity, the free Mongrelfolk have a long tradition of artistic expression. Their music is an acquired taste though, being a bizarre cacophony of animal songs mixed with mournful dirges and wails. Their art has similar expressions of a reverence for the world tinged with deep spiritual pain. Their literature is full of poetry, hauntingly emotional. Those who wish to base their character on this race are usually either escaped slaves whose masters finally succumb to outside forces, as the Mongrelfolk always knew they would, or free Mongrelfolk who have been inspired by some ballad or tale to take up the life of an adventurer. While fighting is not in their blood, Mongrelfolk make natural rogues, and a few aspire to become bards or even wizards. Even the most outgoing Mongrelfolk is a shy, quiet, and easily embarrassed individual though. This shame that makes them conceal their bodies follows even the most successful adventurer throughout their life. They hate what they look like, and sometimes turn to adventuring in order to try and forget for a time. Of course, Most people they meet are quick to remind them with a gasp by turning away or by outright insults. The so-called civilized races can be the most cruel. Mongrelfolk speech is punctuated with grunts, whistles, and amazingly accurate animal noises. They use a wide vocabulary of gestures when they talk and can often have a silent conversation in their own sign language. When they hum or sing to themselves, the songs are abstract and don't fit the sort of structure that most races find pleasant. The concept of fate is central to their life. They're great believers in what will be will be. This makes them infinitely patient and extremely ordered. Those that become adventurers may have decided that fate needs a little help now and then, but they still hold to the belief that everything is planned and they can't change it. Of course, most feel that something good is waiting for them in the future. All they have to do is wait patiently for it to arrive, preferably out of the spotlight. They like to avoid contact with others, except their companions, and have come to believe that stealing what they need, but never more than they need, is perfectly acceptable. They love art, music, and literature. Most read everything they can get their hands on. Often, when the party discovers scrolls or books, Mongrelfolk player characters will try to acquire them instead of seeking magical weapons, items, or even gold. Their vocal range is, as mentioned, quite remarkable. They have a truly formidable gift for perfectly imitating sounds made by any monster or creature they've encountered. Though they can't imitate something like the full roar of a dragon or the sound of its breath weapon, all Mongrelfolk are taught by their own kind from a very early age how to use sleight of hand. It's a racial skill that they get automatically. They also have an exceptionally stealthy manner about them as a race. They tend to camouflage themselves and their items. When rolling those sleight of hand and stealth checks, they always double their proficiency bonus on the roll. Shall I jump the gun here and say as a race it makes little sense for them to have any set modifier for their ability scores? Maybe wisdom for their stoic patience and their observational skills, but they are simply too variable in size and shape for anything physically consistent. Just roll up their stats and give them 3 extra attribute points, placed them wherever you like. If these are all dumped into a single attribute, there's probably some outlandish physical feature to go along with it. I leave it up to your imagination. From Dragon Magazine issue number 242, we have an in-depth ecology article, and we learn a number of finer details about the Mongrelfolk. And I'll just interject a little bit here about their attitude towards money, treasure, magical items and things. They're very practical. They look at things from a survivalist point of view. In their world, they don't often interact with civilized society in any sort of fair and balanced fashion. No amount of gold is going to make up for the prejudice that they feel from other people. So gold is kind of superfluous to them. They understand the use of it, but for the most part they look to be self-sufficient. Most of them don't live very long, and like many other short-lived races, they grow quickly. They reach adult size around age 4 or 5, and they live to a maximum age of 40, usually. Of course, those held as slaves by other races rarely live even that long. Many will die from violence or mishap from being placed in dangerous situations, or simply worked to death by the age of 15 to 20 years. In saying that, you could encounter a Mongrelfolk who is 110 years old, just very rarely. The widespread enslavement of the race makes them guard their culture closely. They have 2 names. One they speak among their own kind, which will be some sort of animal or monster noise, such as badger growl or nightingale, and the other name is what they call their slave name, typically related to their physical appearance and almost always derogatory or mean, referring to them only by their most outlandish and ugly features, such as fish eyes or lizard foot, pimple face or whatever. Mongrelfolk don't give themselves slave names, but they often adopt the first slave name given to them by others, no matter how derogatory it is. After all, Mongrelfolk don't really care what other races call them. They know their true names. Mongrelfolk true names are difficult for other races to get right, sometimes deliberately, because they rely on that skill with mimicking animal sounds. 2 Mongrelfolk can pass on a load of information about any given area's wildlife in moments, just by one singing a disjointed and abstract song of animal calls and noises to the other, and the other Mongrelfolk only needs to hear the noise secondhand that one time for them to be able to perfectly repeat it from then on. They prefer not to be seen. They are well aware that their appearance causes disgust and fear and often ridicule, and for this reason their whole race is abnormally fascinated with the concept of invisibility. For it not only hides their twisted bodies from sight, but also aids in their thievery abilities. To many Mongrelfolk, becoming invisible is their ultimate goal, and the quest for a ring of invisibility has launched more than a few of them on the path to adventure. The Mongrelfolk's knack for camouflage is built into them over their lifetime. They can use whatever is at hand to hide very quickly, much like the hobbits in Lord of the Rings. They will grab twigs, branches, leaves, dirt, mud, dungeon furnishings and so on to aid their stealth, and they can also hide objects in a similar manner. Because they are placed at the bottom of every society, they hate status and they ensure that there's no status in their own society. All Mongrelfolk consider each other equal to every other Mongrelfolk. There's no titles other than their true names. If they have to identify as a leader or some special role in the group, they will indicate that with what they're wearing, not with what they call each other. Curse of Strahd adds some lore about their origins, which is it's one of the most complete. I do quite like this older lore about them having an inherited trait where they copy the genetic information from creatures that they eat and pass it down to their offspring. That's related to why they were created in the first place. That creature is called an infiltrator, and that really reminds me of Warhammer 40k and the Kroot species. But the adventure sourcebook tells us that the Mongrelfolk could come into existence via a transformative magical process that could be reversed using supernatural means. Those who underwent the transformation were not true Mongrelfolk, as they were not born that way. Their offspring, though, will be Mongrelfolk and breed true as a distinct race in their own right. They have a high mortality rate with births, and only very rarely will have a child with another race that has any of the traits of that original parent just expressed so that they look completely normal. Typically the child will be Mongrelfolk and celebrated among their own kind. They cherish their children, since so many of them don't make it. Mongrelfolk religion is secretive and revolves around the deity they call the Hidden God. This is actually a twisted and warped image of their creator, some unnamed wizard. Despite lacking any evidence of this god's existence, either from spells or other miracles, the Mongrelfolk still believe in his existence. It makes sense to them, a race of people who dream of being unseen, having an unseen god, right? Anyway, they wait for the return of the Hidden God so that he can restore their race to their days of glory, allowing them to freely choose between shapes like their legendary ancestors, the infiltrators, could. Or, I think I'm going to have to make a video about those creatures for sure. They sound very fascinating. So, Mongrelfolk who do not feast for the purpose of absorbing utility traits do so believing that the Hidden God desires them to, either wanting to set a number of humanoid forms in them before returning their shapeshifting abilities, so that the Mongrelfolk will have this unknown variety of forms to choose from when they do so. It's a kind of complicated biological aspect to their nature. Among the Mongrelfolk who share this faith, it is seen as pious to not attempt to alter their appearance to become more attractive, believing it will cause the Hidden God to forsake them and not return their ability to shapeshift into any form they choose. Most Mongrelfolk communities have at least one priest or priestess of the Hidden God, even in enslaved communities, but this is actually just a role they hand to members of the community who are too old or injured to do very much of anything else. It's an honorary position. Mongrelfolk might act in service to the goblinoid god Meriadar, who provides Mongrelfolk priests and shamans with true divine power, as opposed to the Hidden God, who does not. Meriadar also teaches patience, acceptance, and tolerance, and has a varying appearance of patchwork features, which neatly mirrors those of Mongrelfolk, so it's easy to see why they gravitate towards that god. They find an affinity with his actual appearance. Mongrelfolk prefer to dress in clothing made of stitched rags, found, scavenged, hooded to better hide themselves in plain sight. They also have a very clever method of blending into communities of other races. Those with more obvious and outlandish features would dwell somewhere near the city, town, or settlement, out of the way but not really out of sight, so they're known, and people will associate the Mongrelfolk with those more outlandish deformities, while those with less obvious features will blend into the population, and it's a good reason why they favour populations with a mixture of different races. They are hardy and can eat a huge variety of food, but left to their own they will simply farm vegetables and live on those, protecting their little area with traps and sometimes raising domesticated livestock for milk and cheese. They retain the ability from their infiltrator ancestors to store genetic information from the meat they feast on, which can be passed down and manifested as physical traits in their children. The original infiltrators were the result of a wizard breeding a new type of shapeshifter, more easier to control than doppelgangers. The infiltrator could fully transform into anything it sampled from meat that it had eaten from. However, the wizard who made them neglected to stop them breeding with each other, and their offspring were all Mongrelfolk, so the trait to fully transform didn't breed true. The original infiltrators were lean, very pale-skinned, with no nose, a slit for a mouth, and large black eyes, so they looked kind of doppelgangery. The ability of Mongrelfolk to quietly and calmly shoulder abuse and deprivation seems to have no limit. They are certainly a strong people. Even while they suffer, they keep working, keep hoping for better days ahead. In the Forgotten Realms, there is currently still a community of Mongrelfolk who live in the upper Underdark near Beregost and Candlekeep. They dwell in a city called Telectus, along with some part illithid Sverfneblin deep gnomes transformed into Mosgrikan mutants within the city. The Mongrelfolk's population is getting larger and larger by the year. The city is reasonably safe since the Mind Flayer Ariza Creed returned to the city of Arindal, abandoning their servitor Mosgrikan and leaving them behind. Please hit the like button if you made it this far. Subscribe if you like what I do. Check out my Patreon for all the full scripts for these videos. Keep buying some sweet merchandise from my Teespring shop. Wear your geek with pride. Don't forget to leave me comments and requests for any monsters that I haven't covered yet that you'd like to see me do. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.